100,000. 100,000 is the number of the native speakers of the Ainu language when the shogunate arrived in Hokkaido 200 years ago. The current number of native speakers of that language is 20. In every state, every province of nearly every country, this issue has repeated itself. From Navajo to Gaelic to pretty much every language in Africa. Colonialism has consistently suppressed indigenous languages throughout pretty much all of history. I am Cameron, and I will be giving you what I believe to be the genuinely best proposal for the revitalization of various indigenous languages. It is known as Language Nest. It is a form of immersion using elders in the language. They don't have to be native speakers, but it is practical for them to be native speakers. I will explain to you the core tenets of Language Nest. Ooh, hang on. There we go. Okay. The most important step that you need first is a safe space. A study by Nazuki in 2021 and various other people have shown that language nests are most effective with children, as children under 10, generally speaking people under 25, but especially children under 10, are in a critical stage of language acquisition in which they can learn languages incredibly quickly. A lot of us have not had the opportunity to do that when we were children. I was very lucky to have that opportunity. Granted, it was not indigenous language, it was Japanese, but still. If we can get more children into a safe environment while they are young, they can learn any language through any circumstances. Which brings me to mentorship. While pretty much any exposure to a language will be absorbed by a child, it is good to have elders in the community, parents, stuff like that, who know the language, who can surround the child with a nurturing environment to learn it fluently. There is no point if you can only write a couple of sentences. What you want is to be able to speak, or in a couple of cases, sign the language, and this will allow the best chance. As I have stated earlier, early exposure is incredibly important. Al Jazeera has made a video on language nests in New Zealand, and it has shown that through the New Zealander indigenous languages, early exposure has taken some communities down from dying with the average speaker above the age of 60 to, I believe the study was about 5% of the town speaking, and this was a town of several thousand people. This is a pretty good metric here. Language nests have worked on children, and we currently now have, I cannot remember the name of the New Zealander language, but we currently have an average of around 30 years old for the native speaker. Family and community. You cannot just have one mentor teaching the language. For language nests to work, there needs to be an entire community around it. You can develop that community from one native speaker, but if the child's parents are not engaging in the language, if the child's teachers are not engaging in the language, if nobody is encouraging the child, then they will not succeed to the highest capability. I have seen in an article by Bowen that in Australia, schools have started adopting indigenous languages, and that has led to, I believe, about a 10% increase in indigenous language fluency within Australia. Finally, future-proofing. This one seems to be relative common sense. You can't just stop the program after 10 years. If you want a language to stay alive forever, this needs to continue until it can sustain itself. This is an incredibly difficult task, as it does require funding. Funding is oftentimes hard to get. funding is oftentimes hard to convince people to give. But so long as we can ensure that this continues for several decades at least, I strongly believe that any language nest can create enough native speakers to keep a language sustainable, at least within a small town or community. In conclusion, I believe that this is the best shot a lot of languages have at survival. I know that learning a second language is hard, and perhaps talking in a room full of adults is not the best way to convince to learn these languages. But I know that a lot of people will have children one day, and I hope that you can put consideration into, if not indigenous languages, at least putting your children in a scenario in which they can thrive learning a second language. It's very hard to learn indigenous languages in the area we are in, despite standing on ground that used to belong to indigenous people. I have not found anywhere near here that offers any programs like this. I hope that I have encouraged you to support any programs like this that could come here in the future. Thank you.